Let's be frank here for a moment, and I'm not talking about trig. MMA fighters can be jerks. I'm not saying that all of them are jerks. I'm not saying being a jerk is being a bad person. But as Carlos Condit once replied to a tweet directed at me on Twitter, this isn't figure skating, my friend, smiley face. MMA is the meanest, toughest, hardest sport in the entire world in my humble cartoon opinion, which is why it's so incredible that in the midst of all the aggression, bravado, and conflict, this sport has somehow produced some genuinely nice people. Today we're going to take a look at the fighters who generally skip the snarling and choose to approach MMA with a smile and a kind word. They've opted out of the pre-fight bashing of their opponent, and in many ways just want to help everyone get to the cage on weight and on time. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point, and these are the 10 nicest fighters who could still destroy you. Number 10. George St. Pierre. Don't get me wrong, there's been some moments in GSP's career. Well, just one moment that stands out really, and that was the completely unprompted burial of Matt Hughes post-victory at UFC 63.
Not impressed by your performance.
Something St. Pierre would regret and wish he could take back, calling his actions low class in 2015. And while he will at times respond when provoked, it's usually with a smile and a cheesy quip. GSP is about as professional and polite as a fighter can be. For a time, he was the standard bearer of niceness in a sport that was seemingly filled with maniacs in the public's eye. George carried himself like other pro athletes, wearing suits to press conferences and being approachable and lighthearted in interviews. The only time he doesn't seem to have a smile on his face is when he's in the cage. The arrogance of his early career made way for a humble and kind super champion that would go on to be one of the sport's all-time greats as he matured in his fight game as well as the mental one. By his career's end, he was the definition of a classy champion, and to this day, you'd be hard-pressed to find many who are more lighthearted than GSP. Number 9. SARA McMann. The art of the call-out is something we've discussed at length on this channel. Getting your name out there and getting the attention of a high-level opponent is something that most fighters just have to do. They have to play the game, and the game is usually being an asshole. SARA McMann is having none of that. When SARA wanted Cupcake Miesha Tate back in 2014, she put this scathing tweet out there. Hey UFC, I'd like to fight at Miesha Tate since she just beat an undefeated fighter, Ren Nakai. Sick burn. Sick tweet. The fight was actually made after that, and McMahon's post-fight interviews are always just as polite as they can be as well. After defeating Jessica Ai in 2016, McMahon made the nicest title fight call-out in history.
And I'd also like to get a title shot.
After a win against Gina Mazzani, she again kindly called for a championship bout. For SARA, there's no reason to be mean. She told fighters only, you don't have to hate each other and be vicious towards each other. I don't have to hate anybody. We're all out here doing the same thing. Words to live by. Number 8. Rich Franklin. In a time when MMA culture was mainly skulls, barbed wire tattoos, and mohawks, Rich Franklin appeared on the scene as just the most wholesome guy you could imagine. He had a clean-cut executive look to him. He was a math teacher getting 30 grand a year to care about your kids. He was always a thoughtful and respectful interview. He's exactly what any sport would want as a representative. And despite being what many would consider a pretty mild guy, especially in this sport, Franklin was still a fan favorite. Everybody loved Rich, and he was a hell of a middleweight. He never had a bad word to say about his opponents. He was always incredibly gracious in defeat. Just watch his post-fight interviews against Anderson Silva. It just seemed like the bravado nonsense aspect of the sport was so far below his radar, it never even registered to him that he was a tough guy. He was one of the first fighters you would hear people label classy, and in a sport that wasn't too far removed from pay-per-view bans and the human cockfighting stigma, Franklin was the right nice guy to show the world that MMA wasn't just for brutes and assholes. Number 7. FEDOR Emelianenko. I think the best way to describe FEDOR is to compare him to a panda bear. Pandas seem super chill, they're very cuddly, everybody loves them, they just kind of hang out all day and look happy. But if you were to provoke one, it would absolutely destroy you. And that is FEDOR Emelianenko. He doesn't talk much, he never has anything negative to say about anything or anyone really. He seems very docile most of the time, very stoic, but as soon as that horn starts the fight, he becomes an absolute killer. FEDOR's brutal style made him a force at heavyweight despite his size, and his 30 finishes were enough to strike fear in the hearts of all of his opponents. But the second the referee ended the bout, Emelianenko was right back to his stoic and lighthearted self, occasionally cracking jokes that he himself would smirk or laugh about, but always respectful towards his opponents, win or lose. Even the great Chael Sonnen, who is the master of getting under people's skin, couldn't crack FEDOR's ultra-chill persona, and by the time they would fight in 2018, he'd essentially given up on saying anything about the legend that wasn't tongue firmly in cheek. Number 6. Roxy MADAFFERI. When your nickname is the Happy Warrior, it's kinda hard to imagine that person being mean, and Roxy MADAFFERI is one of the nicest folks in the whole damn sport. A huge anime and cosplay fan, Roxy is about as close to the American version of Goku on Dragon Ball Z as a fighter can get. She doesn't have an ounce of mean in her bones and never expresses any ill will towards her opponents. She simply wants the chance to compete and improve her skills. A women's MMA pioneer, MADAFFERI's been in the fight game since 2003 and recently upset prospects Antonina Shevchenko and Macy Barber. A perfect example of Roxy's kind-hearted nature was the DM she sent to Barber leading up to fight week, giving her a heads up about the hotel's bathroom situation in case it might affect her weight cut. Super nice thing to do. Macy responded by saying the past is never ready for the future. It didn't go over well. After Roxanne's victory, Barber's dad blew the whole thing off as a fluke, and of course MADAFFERI was kind about that as well, complimenting Macy and saying, meh, dads are supposed to be biased and say stupid things. Tell me you can't imagine Goku saying that line. Number 5. Sage Northcutt. When Super Sage burst onto the MMA scene in 2014, he was wowing people with his ridiculous action star physique and 7 straight wins with 7 straight finishes. But it's Northcutt's demeanor that will be one of his lasting legacies. Perceived as a handpicked star by many fighters on the roster due to his mass market appeal and good looks, Sage had a target on his back as soon as he entered the UFC, and many felt his polite nature was some kind of act. It reminds me of Tim Tebow. People were constantly waiting for the perfect facade to crumble. Sage just seemed like too nice a guy, but over time, through wins and losses, Northcutt proved that he was just being himself. Known for hilariously calling his elders Mr. in all of his interviews,
same for Mr. White, all these awesome fighters, and be at the press conference.
Sage's politeness and general positivity would make Ned Flanders look like a douchebag. There is literally a video from MMA Junkie titled, "Sage Northcutt can't even remember the last time he wasn't happy." The guy was just eternally positive regardless of circumstances.
Did you think he was going to say something negative?
Thank you.
Even after his brutal KO and his debut at 1, Sage doesn't seem to shake his happy-go-lucky nature for anything. And yet at the same time, he clearly has the discipline and drive required to have reached the level of the sport he obtained. At 24, it's unclear where Sage's MMA career goes from here, but there's no doubt whatever he does, he'll be doing it with a smile and a can-do attitude. Number 4. Holly Holm. Holly Holm once told Kelly Ripa and some guy on Live with Kelly that the only time she uses the word hate is when she says she hates to lose. And that just about sums up everything you need to know about the kind nature of the literal preacher's daughter. Holm, much like many on our list, is more concerned about being the best athlete she can be and winning than she is about turning her fights into something personal and nasty. Despite never having a bad thing to say about anyone, Ronda Rousey randomly decided to start something with Holm during the weigh-in for their UFC 193 fight. Holm looked more confused than anything.
That was very intense. What exactly was all that about?
I don't know, I was just having a drink, you know.
Rousey then went on to call Holm a fake humility bitch on social media, so after her upset win, you could understand if Holly wanted to rub it in Ronda's face. But of course she didn't. She told Larry King that she said to Ronda post-fight,
You know, I really admire you for being such a great dominant champion, and a lot of us wouldn't be here without you, so I appreciate you.
Holly Holm is all class. Number 3, Demian Maia. In many ways, Demian Maia is the embodiment of the stoic martial artist. He can't be bothered with any of the politics of the sport or what his opponents have to say pre-fight. All he cares about is consistently honing his craft and testing his abilities against high-level opponents. He's stated in interviews he's always wanted to prove you don't have to be a violent person to win in MMA, and the respect he's shown others throughout his career has been reciprocated tenfold, as Maia is one of the most well-liked and revered fighters in the sport today. Hell, even Colby Covington called him a legend and said he had a great career. He also called him a one-trick pony, but if that's the worst thing Colby has said about you, I'd say you're fortunate. From 2008's breakout fighter to 2015's comeback fighter, the 2-time title contender has quietly and consistently morphed his MMA game into a real problem for anyone should the fight go to the ground. An infamously disrespectful moment in Maia's career was when Anderson Silva absolutely humiliated him in their fight over a perceived slight by Damian that, as far as I can tell, was more Anderson firing himself up for the fight than anything. And in fact, the Spider would beg for Maia's forgiveness afterwards for his behavior during the fight. Maia said of the clowning he received from Silva, it was disrespectful and unnecessary. Aside from that, it was a normal fight. If that bout couldn't turn Maia into a jerk, nothing can. Number 2. Stephen Thompson. The nicest mofo title. Do I honestly need to say anything else? He's so nice they couldn't even put motherfucker on the belt because that would be too much. Stephen Thompson told Ariel Helwani after receiving the prestigious award on his show that it upsets his dad that nothing upsets him.
Okay, I take that back.
The video game.
Video games.
You rage.
So I rage like no other, for sure. Kids, don't watch it. I rage.
Wonder Boy approaches the sport as high-level competition and nothing more. When he's in the octagon, he's proven that his attitude towards the sport hasn't at all affected his ability to get the job done, spectacularly putting away several opponents and having an absolute battle with Tyron Woodley. Their first fight, not the second one.
It's all right, man. I don't know why you gotta be so mean, man. This guy's so mean.
Thompson carries himself outside the cage with a polite and playful demeanor that at times confuses his foes who are used to tough guy antics, but his constant goofing around can disarm even the baddest of motherfuckers. My favorite nice guy moment was when Steven quietly removed the Monster Energy cans from Conor McGregor's position at the UFC 205 press conference as his exchanges with Eddie Alvarez got more heated. No defeat or setback has changed his attitude towards the sport or the respect he shows his opponents. You'll never see him go off on some crazy shit-talking tirade on social media. Thompson is a breath of fresh air in a sometimes foul sport. Number 1. Junior Dos Santos. I know we've got a surprise winner here. I'm sure most of you assumed it would be Wonder Boy, but as nice as he is, he can't match the devastation that JDS brings to the cage in addition to his kind persona. The fight game is built on animosity and bitter rivalries, but Junior Dos Santos has never been one for any of that. He has a career built on his resume alone. JDS's 21 wins and 15 spectacular KO TKOs led him to a heavyweight title and 2 other attempts at the strap, and he couldn't have been a nicer guy along the way. In the cage, Dos Santos is an intimidating force. His aggressive pre-fight pointing lets you know that Mr. Nice Guy has left town, and now you gotta deal with 2 hands filled with murder and a chin that can withstand 2 tons of dynamite before it would call it a night. But as soon as that final horn goes off, Dos Santos is instantly back to the kind, gentle, and playful guy he just naturally is. His post-fight interviews, even after the most devastating and brutal losses, have been notoriously cheery. Junior's can-do attitude and positivity just never seem to take a hit, regardless of the circumstances. Never snappy with the media or his foes leading up to a fight, Dos Santos prefers to sell his fights on the level of talent in the cage and not on some fake angry persona. He'll also bust out a pop song on occasion.
Purple rain, purple rain.
Never a pushover, but always genuine, JDS has not let the business change his happy-go-lucky approach to life, and he is the embodiment of this list. Huge shout out to the pride of the West Midlands, Tom Moore, for putting his editing sorcery to work on this video. Follow him on Twitter at TomMJMoore. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like and subscribe. We've got 3 new videos or more for you every single week. Let us know what you thought of the video in the comments below. Follow On Point MMA on Twitter, and have yourself a wonderful day.